Well, good morning. As Pastor said, my name is Schultz. It's great to be here. I'm a pilot and mechanic. I'm not a pastor, so it's always a little bit intimidating getting up in front of everyone, but it is a pleasure to be here in Oregon and to be here with you guys. After I believe the church has been supporting us for the full 6 years we've been in Alaska, and it's always hard to know when we come back what to share and where to jump in and all that, but we do see a lot of new faces, and so we'll just kind of start with some review, and for some of you, you've probably heard it, so I apologize, but it's a lot of new faces. So, when most people think of mission work, they think overseas, and for good reason. I went to Moody Aviation, and that's where I did most of my training, but really I owe the man I am to Derek, because he finished my CFI, my flight instructor rating, so I'm grateful to him, and but finished up some training here in Oregon after graduating. But most people think of overseas when they think of mission work, and that's what we were planning on doing. After I graduated, we moved back here to Oregon, and we were looking at going overseas, and every time we were about to pull the trigger and join an organization, we just felt like the Lord was closing the door on that. And we had looked into Alaska a little bit, and Tabitha had said, well, I don't want to go to Alaska, but if that's what you want to do, I'll do it. And I said, no, we're not going to do that. We really need to be on the same page. And got home from work one day, and she said, hey, it looks like Missionary Aviation Repair Center needs pilots. And I said, well, I thought you weren't wanting to go to Alaska. And she said, well, I think the Lord's changed my heart. And so we looked into it, we applied, and went to Alaska and tested and got accepted, and that's where we've been for the last 6 years. And I'm sure I've met several of you who have been to Alaska and know a little bit, but for those that don't, oh yes, it works. All right, it's good. You never know with technology. This here is a map of Alaska, and you can see the highway headed north and south there, the red line. Everything west of that is off the road system. So the only way to get there is either by boat or airplane or in the winter snow machine. But really, the only reliable way for transportation is by airplane. And just for an example, we're in Soldotna, which is near Kenai. You can kind of see Kenai in the southern part there. But just for an example, one of the Bible camps we fly to is like 393 miles from Soldotna. So really big state. Next picture, you'll get a little bit of a better idea of how big Alaska is. And with over half of it only accessible by air. So really inaccessible, really rugged, just a tough environment. There's 230 villages that are only accessible by air. And there's been missionaries in Alaska since the late 1800s, but there's still a lot of work that needs to be done there. The suicide rate is 6 times the national average. The abuse is really high. A lot of the villages, most of the villages at least have a church building, but many of them don't have any pastor or any permanent pastor. Maybe there's someone that'll come through every now and then and preach, but a high percentage of the villages don't have pastors that are living there. Let's see here, that's just one of the villages that we fly a lot of Child Evangelism Fellowship, and we flew a suicide prevention team there a couple times, and just one of the villages we fly to that has a church building but no pastor that lives there long term. Let's see. So I don't know how familiar you guys are with some of the history of Alaska, but in the late 1800s, it was broken up into 5 different regions. So the government told Sheldon Jackson to divide the state up into 5 regions and send evangelical denominations into those regions. So there's still this region will be Moravian and this region will be Covenant. And just for an example, the Moravian region, there's 26 Moravian villages and only 6 pastors. And so here's one of the villages that we fly for that doesn't currently have a pastor, but does have a church. This is a picture of it's kind of hard to see the village out there on the spit, but a picture of what some of the villages look like. Alaska, most people think of mountains, and there are a lot of big mountains, but there's not a lot of villages in the mountainous areas. Most of them are on the wetlands, and 45% of Alaska is is wetland and marshy region. And a lot of these villages, the people historically would have been somewhat nomadic. They'd go to the coast in the summer and get fish and stuff from the sea, and then in the winter they'd move inland where there's more fuel for fire and stuff like that. And then when the governments came in, they said your kid will be in school, and they'd build a school in these places where there's really not a great way to have an economy or sustain life year round. And so you'll have villages in these places and kind of scratch your head, why'd they have a village here? Well, it wasn't really a place for them to live full-time or long-term because they were somewhat nomadic until the government put up schools there. It was said when Christianity came to the villages that animism wouldn't go away, but it would just go underground. And animism was just, it was their previous way of belief. And the more I spend time in the villages, the more I can see some of the superstitions and some of the beliefs that are still held there. And while Christianity has been there a long time, there's still a huge need for discipleship and biblical training. And one of the most effective ways for that is to have long-term pastors and missionaries. But it's a pretty challenging place for pastors and missionaries to stay long-term because it's very remote, very isolated. The weather can be challenging, and an apparent lack of fruit, it can just be a easy place for burnout and discouragement for the pastors. And so that's one of the things we do is support the pastors and missionaries that are out in the villages. And we do that in a variety of ways. One of the ways we do that is by doing maintenance. Missionary Aviation Repair Center, our founder started it. He was a missionary pilot, and he just saw how bad a shape all the pastors and missionaries' airplanes were in. And so he set up on the road system because it's easier to get parts and do maintenance on the road system. And so he set up on the road system in the 1960s and started doing maintenance for the pastors and missionaries out there. And before long, he got some airplanes and started flying as well. So we do maintenance for pastors and missionaries throughout the state and different mission organizations. There's a lot of different ministries that have airplanes, and we do maintenance for them, and we just almost for free, highly discounted. And we also sell parts. I run the parts department when I'm not flying, and all those things just help us support the ministries at a much discounted rate. And Bible camp, one of the big things we do all summer is fly for Bible camp. And we pick up kids to go to Bible camp, and they're just jacked. I mean, the plane's rocking. You can't get them to be quiet. They're just going crazy. They're so excited to go to Bible camp. And this is going home from Bible camp. They go spend a week at Bible camp, and they get on the plane, and they're still excited, and they're hyper, and about 2 minutes later, they're just gone. You look back, and they're just exhausted. And for many of them, most of them, it's the highlight of their summer. And for many of them, especially, if they come from villages that maybe don't have a pastor, it's their only chance to really get exposed to the gospel. And for those who have been exposed to the gospel, it's the time for them to just get good biblical training and be just in a place where they're loved and just get to have a lot of fun and a good time. We're just really blessed by the Bible camps that we get to fly for and the good Bible training they do. And the one Bible camp we fly for in Port Ellsworth, the pastor there has an airplane, so he gets to go out and do follow-up throughout the year. And it's just a real blessing for us to be a part of that. Last year, we got to fly 433 children and staff from, I forgot to write down how many villages, but from a lot of different villages around the state to various Bible camps. And we also, our staff got to contribute 18 weeks worth of counselors, nurses, and kitchen staff for the Bible camps. And being the pilot, a lot of times we don't get to help out at the camp because we're just busy flying the kids. Sometimes we do get to spend a week doing that, and that's always a lot of fun. But some of the wives are nurses, and they go out and help. And a couple years ago, Tabitha got to spend a week out as a counselor at Tenalian Bible Camp and just pour into the kids for the week. And it's just a Bible camp is a big part of what we do, and it's just we love it. I wish I got to spend more time there instead of just being the pilot, but the kids have to get there too, so that's a big blessing. Some of the different ministries we fly for, different church conferences throughout the state in Western Alaska, and Child Evangelism Fellowship. Here's a picture of us. We try to fly Christmas totes to different pastors and missionaries every year, just a way to be an encouragement to them. And so this is just a picture. That's the new pastor there at Koyak, and it's always fun to do that and get to drop off just boxes to be a blessing to them over the holiday season. We do fly a lot of building supplies too. The pastor, the pastor there unloading the plane, he's been out in McGrath for about 4 years, and we've got to fly a lot of supplies to him. I'll tell you more about that project later, but we can fly at least 52 sheets of sheetrock in one of those, and it's miserable, let me tell you. Open both the doors and take them in one sheet at a time, and we're actually saving up to get a Caravan. It's got bigger doors. You can lay the sheetrock out flatter, and it's a cheaper airplane to operate than our King Airs. But these King Airs, they were actually donated to us from Samaritan's Purse, and they're a great airplane. We have 2 identical ones, but they're getting really old, and so we're saving up to get some replacement airplanes. But yeah, we fly a lot of cargo. I've actually put a 4-wheeler in one of these airplanes too. It's not a good cargo plane. It's a good passenger plane, but we make do with what we have, and so there's just a picture flying stuff out to McGrath. Just a little bit of winter flying. When we fly in the winter, if we can, we put the wing covers on. But one of the biggest challenges in the spring, when it warms up and cools down, if it warms up in the day and we put the wing covers on and we get some rain and then it freezes, the next day you can't get them off. So here's one of my coworkers just scraping off the wing before we fly one morning. And so just a lot of different challenges flying in Alaska. Let's see here. Here's just a few more pictures from Bible camp. And one of the joys, we get to fly for Bible camp, but we don't always know all the details of what goes on. And this is Ed. He's one of the believers highly involved in Makoryak, which is an island out in western Alaska, and got to pick up a bunch of these kids and the speaker and fly them home, from Bible camp last summer. And we brought an extra headset and was asking Ed how it went, and it was good, and he finally got to the point where he shared the gospel. All the kids wanted to give their life to Christ, and we don't know their hearts, but we just trust that the Lord's working in their hearts and trust the fruit to Him. And it's just exciting knowing that the gospel is being shared and that kids' hearts are being stirred, and just hope that they'll continue to go and get, we really hope that they'll get pastors in those villages so that they can be discipled, and so that it's not just 1 week every year that they're hearing this. Just some more Bible camp stuff here. One of the issues flying in remote areas is when you have something break, you don't always have access right there. Dwight and I were taken off out of Tenalian Bible Camp at Port Ellsworth one time last summer, and we took off, and I'm flying, and he's going through the checklist and looking at the gauges, and the left torque gauge wasn't coming up, and looking at all the rest of the gauges, and it just looks like an indication, but we got to go back. So we turned around and landed, and thankfully there's a maintenance shop there at Port Ellsworth, and so went over there, and the mechanic there had an extra gauge, and so he just gave it to us and told us to just use it as long as you need and either buy me a new one or give it back. So we popped the old gauge out and put that one in and did a fast taxi before we took off, and everything seemed to be in order. And so we took off and everything was good. It delayed us a couple hours, but got to finish flying the kids to and from Bible camp. And the next week when we were back at Bible camp, we just dropped the part off and kept going. It was just neat to see how the Lord provided and see how He uses different people. There's a lot of believers out there in that village, and that mechanic there, the owner of that shop's a believer, and so he just, that's, probably a $4,000 part that he just let us borrow for a week and give back and didn't even charge us. And so just neat to see everybody chipping in and getting the kids to Bible camp. This is the end of our second 3-year term, and like I was saying, it's always hard to know how to summarize. I'll come to this picture here in a little bit, but how to summarize the last 3 years. Our first term was full of newness and some growing pains and a lot of learning. And while we're still learning a lot, I feel like a lot of the day-to-day stuff I've kind of gotten figured out, and feel like we've kind of gotten into a little bit of a rhythm. Our first term, we were going up. I was going to be a pilot and mechanic, and we also sell parts. We have the parts department there, and so everybody, when you first join, you have to spend 3 weeks in the parts department just so you learn some of the computer stuff and know how to sell parts if we're shorthanded. And then, so the guy in the right side of the picture there, he and I moved up at the same time, and we both started in the parts department. Well, the parts manager, who'd been there for 14 years, he was moving back to Michigan 2 weeks after we got there, and so I went in the parts room, and they weren't sure what was going to happen, how the parts room was going to get ran. And after 3 weeks, Dwight, he went to the shop, and I stayed in the parts department, and that's been 6 years now. And so I've been running the parts department when I'm not flying, and so it was just, we have close to 4,000 part numbers, and just learning how to manage that with only 2 weeks of training was a big learning curve. Learning how to fly an airplane that was new to me. We had another kid our first term, and we bought our first house, and so the first, and just learning the weather and how to fly in Alaska. So our first term was just lots of new stuff, and this last term, I felt like we got into a little bit more of a rhythm. The day-to-day is not so challenging. There's always challenges, but, I know how to run the parts department, know how to fly the airplane, figured out the weather a little bit, or a lot, I hope, in Alaska. And so we've gotten into a bit of a rhythm. And the nice thing about that, it's allowed us to figure out more ways to bless people because we're not overwhelmed with all the little things that we were at first. And so one of the things I love to do when we fly out to the villages, a lot of times, depending on where we're flying, we'll have lots of stops along the way to pick people up. And maybe we'll stop at a village that has a believer or a pastor that we're just picking someone up and keeping going, but how can we bless them? Well, maybe we can pick up groceries for them or something that they can't get. They can get groceries in the villages, but fresh fruit or eggs, sometimes it's really hard to get eggs. So I like being able to just help out believers and different people, friends we've made out in the villages by, if we're going through a village, just picking up something that's going to be a blessing to them, and that's been a lot of fun for me. I'm a people person. The flying is fun, but the connections and pouring into people is what really keeps me going. And so, just figuring out ways to be a blessing and getting to know more people throughout the villages has just been a lot of fun for me. Last May, I got signed off as captain, so I had some more responsibility with the airplane and being the pilot in command there. So even though before I could log pilot in command, when I was flying, I wasn't the one ultimately in charge of the flight, which is fine. We all need to have that time of learning, but it's been a lot of fun actually being the pilot in command and having a little bit more responsibility there. Last summer, actually, had a lot going for it. We had, like I said, we got to fly 433 different people at the Bible camps, and COVID was done basically, and so some of the Bible camps that had been shut down were in full swing, and some of the stuff we hadn't got to do for a couple years we were back doing again. So that was a lot of fun. The church that Tabitha grew up in Spokane, which is our sending church, they were wanting to bring a group up to help out with the Bible camp. So I kept reaching out to different Bible camps, and the timing just wasn't working out. We had just about given up, and finally I reached out. You saw the picture of us unloading wood at McGrath. I reached out to Brad, the pastor there, and there didn't used to be a Bible camp in that region, but since he moved out there about 4 years ago, they started one, and it's small. It's for McGrath and a couple of the small villages around there, and So I reached out, hey, Brad, do you guys need any help with Bible camp? And he said, well, I'm actually going to be in the lower 48 visiting churches this summer. And the missionary couple there, Tim and Haley, I went to Moody with them, and they're about my age. And he has recently been diagnosed with an aggressive form of ALS, and so they weren't going to be able to be that involved. And Brad said, we're just looking for a church to come run it, otherwise we're not going to be able to have it. And so that was an answer of prayer for our church and for the church out in McGrath, because they were just getting ready to cancel. And so our youth group from Spokane came up and spent 3 days with us in Spokane, which was a huge encouragement. And then I got to fly them out to McGrath, and they got to run the Bible camp out there. And Tabitha and Ryder, I didn't mention earlier, our kids, we didn't bring them along. They're a little bit under the weather this week, but Tabitha and Ryder, who's our oldest, he just turned 9, and Hudson, who's our youngest, they got to go out. And this was the youth group that Tabitha grew up in, and the youth pastor was just a big encouragement to her and had a big impact on her life growing up. And so she got to go out and serve with them, and help run the Bible camp last summer. So that was just a big highlight, and just neat to see the different bodies throughout the country coming together to make the Bible camp happen for the summer, or for the kids. Another neat thing from last summer, so then right across the inlet from Soldotna, it's just like a 20-minute flight. That's probably the nearest village or it is the nearest village to Soldotna that's off the road system. And they've been pretty close to outsiders. There is a Russian Orthodox church there, but no priest. And we've often, hoped that we could find a way to get our foot in the door and be a good influence there. And our food bank there in Soldotna donates food to the elders out there in that village. And so we were able to start flying food every other week, I believe, out to that village, and which has helped us get a foot in the door. And then one of the Bible camps in Soldotna, they had a week where they didn't have anything going on, so we asked the director there, hey, could we rent the camp for a week and put on a Bible camp? And he said, yeah, that'd be great. So we ran a Bible camp and invited all the kids from that village, and only 2 were able to make it, but it was the highlight of their summer, and they were able to hear the gospel just clearly presented. And so the goal is, as we continue to build relationship there, hopefully next year all the kids will come, and we're hoping to do a little aviation camp there next summer, and just pray that the Lord will use that to just continue to build that relationship, and hopefully someday they'll have a church there and a pastor in that village. But that was just an exciting thing to see this summer. Let's see here. So the picture you saw earlier with us pulling wood out of the airplane, that was we were taking wood out to the church in McGrath. The pastor, there was a lodge there that got burnt, and the pastor bought it and is rebuilding it. And they use that. We use the lodge for the Bible camp, and he's using that just to host get-togethers for pastors and missionaries and believers in the villages, because it can be a pretty lonely place for believers out there. And so a lot of times, you'll go out and fly them clear back to the road system, which takes a lot of effort, but his goal was to get a retreat place set up for encouragement of believers in the interior of Alaska. So we got to get to fly a lot of supplies for that. And then in the upstairs of that were the pastor's building a house that he and his family will live in. And so here we got the joy of doing insulation, tons and tons of insulation upstairs above that. And so, actually laying the insulation wasn't fun. It was a lot of fun just being out there helping the pastor, and whenever you get to go do a trip with fellow believers and stay for an extended period, it just seems like it's a good way to connect and just fellowship with people. And so that was a lot of fun. One of the challenges for pastors and missionaries out in the villages is that most of the land is native land, and so housing can be pretty difficult. And the house that the pastor there in McGrath is currently using, it's a cabin the sheeting around the basement is falling off, so it's exposed to open air, and it's not uncommon to be 50 below in McGrath, so it's not a real good long-term situation for his family. They've got 6 kids, and so getting this upstairs fixed and getting a home for him is just going to be a good way to help him stay out there long-term. Some of you probably remember here about a month or two ago that big storm that hit western Alaska. There was a bunch of flooding and wind, and when we were out in McGrath, one of the guys that lives next to the church there, he said, asked if we could come help move this out of his pool. He was riding his boat around after that storm, and he found this mammoth tusk. It's broken off, but it's about 7 feet long and about, I don't know, that big around at the base. It probably weighed close to 70 pounds, but it was just kind of unique and kind of a cool thing, fun to think about when those things were walking around Alaska. Last spring, we got to fly out to Elam. Elam's another church that has their in the Covenant region, and they've got a church, but no pastor, and so a bunch of people have been building a parsonage out there so that they can get a pastor. And in Soldotna, there's a mostly native Bible college there, or Christian college there, and we got to fly a group of college students out and help work on the church parsonage, and that was a lot of fun. We're hoping to get more involved with the college there. We got a bunch of native students there that I was hoping to lead discipleship group. It didn't work this year because we were gone for part of the school year being down here, but hoping to get more involved with them. But that's a lot of fun, just spending time out in the villages. Usually January through April, I get to spend about a week every month out in the villages on different projects and trips. And I miss my family, but those are my favorite trips, just spending time with the people that we get to minister to. And the Bible camps are fun, but it's just fast, and you're dropping kids off, and not as much of the time just fellowshipping and spending time together. You're just kind of more of a taxi driver, which is important. And on a lot of these trips, it's hard work, but you also get to do some fun stuff. One of the guys asked if I wanted to get on the snow machine, and so we went out on the bay and pulled crab pots. And it's probably one of the only times I quit eating crab because I was too full. And I'm just texting my friends back at work, like, pray for us. Our thumbs are getting raw from peeling back the crab. And that was a lot of fun. And then more of the disaster relief from that flood that went through. We got to go to Golovin, which is another church they have a fill-in pastor, but not a long-term pastor right now. But the flood came through, and the water came up about 4 feet, and the buildings are mostly built up on blocks, but they were built up about 3 feet. And so underneath, the sheeting and insulation and everything was in real bad shape. So we got to go out and help work on the church, and once that was done, work on some of the other buildings around town. You can see here, normally the sand is underneath the tires, and that's how much sand got brought in that storm. And then that's the insulation. Another trip we get to do just about annually is to Galena. The pastor at Galena has been there 12 years, and so that's just a big encouragement because you don't hear of a lot of villages with pastors that have been there long term. And Galena is a hub. It's probably got, 600 people maybe. Most of your villages are more like 50 to 200 people, but Galena is a hub village. And so we fly a team out there every year that helps get firewood, and there's lots of firewood available, except that it's on native land, so the pastor can't cut it. And so the only way to get firewood is to take the boat upstream and tie together a bunch of driftwood and pull it back, and then use the outdoor forklift to pull it up, and then cut it up, and then take it back to his church and his house. And this trip was especially challenging. First, we got flat in the forklift, and so we had to find another way to get the wood out of the water. And then on our first load of firewood, we're taking it back to the church, and the truck caught on fire. So we got fire extinguishers and put it out and yanked the firewood out, and then watched it burn. So that was a bit of a rough trip. But just a few random pictures of just sort of life there. We do get to enjoy a couple good weeks of fishing every summer there in Soldotna, so that's always a lot of fun. And my grandparents have a place there, so it's fun to have people come visit and see people in the summer. I don't get to do a lot of hunting, but last year I got to go goat hunting. This year I did, and it's probably the most miserable experience of my life. But we got a goat, so that was good. My neighbor got a moose, and I just thought it was kind of interesting. The heart is almost as big as my head. Doesn't really have anything to do with anything, but just kind of an interesting picture. And probably the biggest highlight of our year, our 9-year-old Ryder, he got baptized at church here a couple months ago, and for a parent, you just can't really think of anything better than children that want to serve the Lord. So that was very exciting for us. Wish we could have brought our kids here this morning, but they were under the weather, so we weren't able to. But as we always are asking ourselves if we're doing what the Lord wants, and are we where He wants us, and especially as we end a term and look at going for another 3 years, and are we really doing what God wants? You look at people out in the villages, pastors and missionaries, and the ones working directly with people, and sometimes it feels like that's the greater work, and I that's not true, but sometimes you can think that way, and then we've asked ourselves, should we move to a village, or should we go overseas like we were originally planning when we were going to school? And it seems like whenever we look at doing something else, the Lord closes the door. And from a selfish perspective, we're happy about that because we love what we're doing, we love where we live, and it's just been a great place to serve the Lord, and we really like it. From a spiritual perspective, I'm reminded of 1 Corinthians 12, and I'll turn there and read a few passages. First, I'll read verses 4 through 7. Now there are varieties of gifts, but the same Spirit, and there are varieties of service, but the same Lord. And there are varieties of activities, but it is the same God who empowers them all and everyone. To each is given the manifestation of the Spirit for the common good. Whatever role we're serving, whether it's behind the scenes or up in front or wherever it might be, wherever we're serving, it's for the common good of the church. It's not for ourselves. It's not for our own benefit. And so sometimes we might think, I should have this position or I should have that role. But the goal is not to puff ourselves up, but to serve the Lord and to build up the church. Let's stay in 1 Corinthians 12, but I'll read verses 12 through 20 now. It says, "For just as the body is one and has many members, and all of the members of the body, though many, are one body, so it is with Christ. For in one Spirit we were all baptized into one body, Jews or Greeks, slaves or free, and all were made to drink of one Spirit. For the body does not consist of one member, but of many. If the foot should say, because I am not a hand, I do not belong to the body, that would not make it any less a part of the body. And if the ear should say, because I am not an eye, I do not belong to the body, that would not make it any less a part of the body. If the whole body were an eye, where would the sense of hearing be? If the whole body were an ear, where would be the sense of smell? But as it is, God arranged the members of the body, each one of them as He chose. If all were a single member, where would the body be? As it is, there are many parts, yet one body." There's always a tendency to glorify certain acts of service or certain positions and overlook others, whether it's the person up front versus the person cleaning in the back or whatever it might be. But that flies in the face of the way God created the church and the body. I would encourage you to serve Him with gladness wherever you are. Be open to what He might have for you. He might be calling some of you to be an elder or a leader in a different role. But serve Him where you are and where you can, and be faithful with the service He has given you, even if it seems small or insignificant. It's not to Him. And while we look at we're often asking, would the Lord have us move out to a village or work with a Bible camp or do this or that? He continues to have us serve in the role we're at. And maybe someday he'll call us into a different role. But for now, that's where he has us, and we're excited to be with MARC, and we're excited to be ready to start another term, another 3 years there. And we just appreciate all you guys and all your prayer and support and everything that many of you guys in the church as a whole has done for us over the past 6 years, and it's just such a blessing to us. I know a lot of you get our newsletter, and just some of the things we've been going through the last year, I guess. Many of you probably know Tabitha was diagnosed with autoimmune disease, which has led to Hashimoto, which you can ask her about that. It's all very confusing to me. But she's on medication and doing well, and on a diet, hoping to get that under control so she can get off the medication. And Tabitha and Hudson and Wade are having some internal mold issues. I didn't even know that existed a year ago, and so that's something we've been working through. And so that's a way you can be specifically just praying for our family, especially for Tabitha. I'm not all that involved in the day-to-day of it. She's got the doctor's appointments and the medication stuff figured out, and so I'm just thankful for her and all the work she does for our family there. And but that's a way you can be praying for us. And just please also pray for open doors in the villages, and pray that there'd be long-term pastors and missionaries out there, and that there would just be a strengthening and growth of the church out there. And we got our booth set up over here. If anybody's interested in signing up for newsletters or talking to us some more, we'll be here after this church, and I'll just go ahead and close in prayer. God, we love you. Just thank you for this day. Thank you for your body throughout the state and throughout the world and the country, and just thank you for the work you're doing in Alaska and here in Lebanon as well. Just pray that your church would grow in depth and in number, and just pray that we would serve you well wherever you have us. Amen.